author event. Welcome to the Spotlight on Author event. This is the fourth in our series of special looks at authors who are members of the Guild of Health Writers, and it's great to see you here. I'm Jacqui Thornton, and I am on the committee of the Guild, and I'll be moderating the questions and answer session later on. So I'm delighted to welcome Laurel Alexander, who's come here today to talk about her book, and she's going to give us an excerpt. This is really hot off the press because we understand that actually it's coming out tomorrow. It's called Integrative Wellness Coaching, a Handbook for Therapists and Counsellors. So welcome to you, Laurel. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So just to give you some background details, this is published by Singing Dragon Publishers, which is an imprint of Jessica Kingsley, and it's intended for complementary and mainstream health professionals and counsellors. And I think, you know, that term integrative wellness, we'll be hearing a bit more about that from Laurel. So just to give you a bit of a background, I think Laurel's going to talk a bit more about herself, but she's a fellow of the National Council of Integrative Psychotherapists and has 20 years experience. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. So Laura, I've given you that, you know, very top line introduction. Do you want to tell me a bit more about yourself and how you came to be doing what you're doing?
Okay, thank you. So I've been in the service industry for 40 years or more, working with adults in personal and professional development. When I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which was in my late 30s, I'm now 63, following recovery, I went into complementary medicine. I'd kind of always wanted to be involved in the health field, but kind of having breast cancer is a bit of a wake-up call. So I woke up and retrained as a reflexologist and moved into various complementary health disciplines. Along with that, I have a strong coaching and training background, working in professional and personal development with adults again, and that kind of came in as part of the health and well-being. So at a point in time, I think I started writing articles many moons ago on things like self-employment and various other things, and complementary healthcare. Then I moved quite quickly into writing non-fiction books. So I've got about 35, 36 non-fiction books under my belt now. About half a dozen of them are related to healthcare. And the most recent one is the Integrative Wellness Coaching with Singing Dragon.
Well, certainly a fantastic experience I know many of our members want to write their first book. So if you're doing 35, 36, pretty impressive. I mean, is that like once a year, is that? So how often would you be, how long would it take you to write one?
Oh, yeah, I'd say on average, it takes me about six months to write a book. I'm very disciplined. One of the good things about writing non-fiction books is you can sell the book idea to a publisher and get commissioned before you actually write the thing. Then it takes about 6 months to write it, and then it's a year or more in the editorial and publishing stage.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, you've written many books. You say a half dozen in the healthcare world. Why did you want to write this book?
The last book I wrote for Singing Dragon was actually 10 years ago, and that was called Integrating, or How to Integrate Your Wellness Coach, How to Integrate, I'm just looking down at my notes here so I don't forget, How to Integrate Wellness Coaching into Your Therapeutic Practice. Now that one was written about 10 years ago for Singing Dragon. Since then, I've written the Resilience Coaching Toolkit and one or two other things, and it was last year, it was 2020 actually, when Singing Dragon came back to me and said they wanted a rewrite of that original book. And I thought, but I don't want to rewrite that original book. I want to write that subject, but so much has happened in the last 10 years in the wellness industry and in my business, which is a training and development company, training people to be wellness coaching personnel. I just had so much more to say. So why I wanted to write it was that my creative urges were going it again. I had lots more to say.
Mm. And that timing, 2020, is quite interesting. I mean, they presumably, was this during COVID or was it before COVID? Or talk to me how that's impacted.
It was during COVID. It was, I mean, like my own head and life was just sort of exploding along with everyone else's at that time. First year, 18 months of it all. And my business was just expanding beyond all kind of decency, really. So I was kind of like running around like a headless chicken. And then the publisher approached me after 10 years and said about a possible rewrite. And like it was, shouldn't I, what should I do? And then sort of thought it was the right thing to do in the lines of, COVID was changing. It was changing. I think wellness coaching is a growing industry and has been for several years. The pandemic exacerbated that growth, I think, and brought in new opportunities for well-being. And really, like, rubbed your nose in it.
Okay. Well, look, let me ask. I mean, you've just mentioned the term well-being. Wellness coaching, and you mentioned well-being, wellness. Is there a difference? And also just to define, what is this integrative and complementary well-being coaching, just so we're all clear with what it is.
Okay. I think I would sort of say that in general, our healthcare attitude is about being done to, so that the patient or client kind of is done to, and they don't necessarily they're not necessarily always encouraged to take ownership. So I'm not saying that the client or patient, I'll use the word client rather than patient. I'm not saying that it's the client's fault they're ill or unwell or have symptoms, or that it's completely their responsibility to get their act together. But nevertheless, we do have a culture of being done to. So we're not, as clients, we're not necessarily used to self-management. So wellness coaching brings in that element, or encourages the element, of ownership and self-management in the client, along with conventional or complementary approaches, or any other approach to their healthcare.
Okay. And how does that fit in with your, you had breast cancer all those years ago. How does that fit in with, obviously, breast cancer can be a mixture of, as you say, traditional and complementary treatments, I guess. And did you feel that you were being done to when you were being treated with breast cancer? Or was taking ownership difficult? Or I just wondered what the interplay is with your personal experience and this concept.
Good question. If you're one of my coaches, I'd like that. Prior to being diagnosed with breast cancer, I kind of felt that I'd lost connection with myself. I seemed to be running around in my life like some headless chicken, involved in the service industry, but very much in career development at that time, out in the community and freelancing and stuff around that, and working on sensitive community estates. But I felt like I'd lost myself. I'd lost my intuition, I just lost myself. And then one day, this is relevant, then one day, I was quite large boobed in those days. I felt that something was wrong in my left breast. There were no lumps, no bumps, there was nothing. There's no history of breast cancer or cancer in my family. It was just something felt odd. So I got myself along to Jan de Winter Clinic, which in those days was a charity, and presented my bosoms for a mammogram, and they said, no, you're under 40, there's no history of, there's no lumps or bumps, whatever. So anyway, I insisted, whatever, and sooner or later an anomaly turned up in the left, deep in the left breast, and it was, so I was connected to my intuition because I listened to my body. The consultant at the cancer unit, he didn't quite understand why I was there, because it just wasn't conclusive. There was no conclusive evidence. But I asked him to continue. He continued his research, and then deep within the breast was found aggressive cancer. and I was given the opportunity of a mastectomy, tamoxifen, which is a chemotherapy drug, and then sort of reduction on the other side to balance me up, etc., etc. So I was offered a lot of allopathic treatment. I chose, there was no doubt about it, I chose a mastectomy and a rebuild, etc. And that felt right. However, along with that, I had psychotherapy, I journaled heavily, I took time out, I looked at my diet, nutrition, yada yada, flower essences, all sorts of things. And I remembered who I was. And then following that recovery is when I stepped into my power as a complementary therapist, and on I went again, and here I still am.
Okay, inspiring talk. Okay, Laurel. So tell me then. So moving forward to the book, it's a you know, there's lots of words in this book, so it's hard to always to ask for what does it say in a nutshell. But what do you think are the key takeaways that you'd want to maybe a general audience to take away?
I think as we move into, well, we're always moving and changing. As healthcare professionals, we're moving and changing. And it's important, I think, to realise that healthcare is becoming more integrated. So by integrated, it's kind of about looking at how the wellness industry is changing. It's about looking at how coaching fits alongside conventional and complementary treatments, and the book goes into this. It's about looking at holistic coaching. It's about looking at motivational coaching, cognitive-behavioural interventions. It's about looking at the coach's reflective practice and self-care. It's about how the coach can work within a team with other professionals. So it's integrated in terms of how integrative coaching is about how it's delivered. It's about looking at the client's mind, body, spirit, looking at their lifestyles and how they integrate with the well-being. Because if somebody's seriously tiddled off at work or overworking, then they are not going to be doing their health, their mental health or their physical health any good in the long run. So, you know, and relationships the same. So it's about the integrative lifestyle of a person and how that affects their physiological and mental and spiritual well-being. And that's what the book looks like.
Okay, well, we're going to come on to it next in a minute, but I just wanted to ask, you know, you talk about how you train wellness coaches. You know, what are we talking about in terms of numbers of how many people are trained in this, and how, you know, what do other therapists and counsellors who aren't aware of it, how are they, you know, how accepted is it in the mainstream? How integrated is it into you know, other approaches?
Right. Okay. Well, one reviewer for the book, for example, is a coach and a counsellor and has a counselling school. So coaching is becoming more accepted into counselling, maybe more accepted into counselling than it is psychotherapy. I would say a lot of students come to wellness professionals at work who are their nurses, GPs, maybe we have more nurses than GPs, occupational therapists, nutritionists, complementary therapists, personal trainers. We're having increasingly, we're having through people from the armed forces and from the police force who are sort of responsible, or partially responsible for employee wellness.
Interesting.
So it's not just healthcare professionals that are coming through.
No, I see.
Interest.
Okay, that's really interesting, Laura. Thank you. Okay, well, look, let's have a reading from the book, and I think, Laurel, you're going to be doing an excerpt relating to how to create an integrated wellness plan.
Yes.
And looking at that. So, yeah, please take it away.
Okay. So forgive me for looking down. I've got my notes here as opposed to a book because I don't have my book yet until next week. Right. Okay, got that little digging. Okay, so This is an excerpt from the chapter which deals with integrated wellness plans, which coaches engage with as part of their overall delivery. So integrative wellness coaches have a number of tools at their disposal that they use to implement this plan. So away I babble here. So scope of practice refers to the boundaries of health and wellness coaching, whether it be coaching an individual or a group, writing a blog or articles, holding or participating in webinars, speaking at educational events, or communicating with colleagues, peers, and other healthcare professionals. The Health and Care Professionals Council say, your scope of practice is the limit of your knowledge, skills, and experience. It is made up of the activities you carry out within your professional role, provided that you have the knowledge, skills, and experience to do them lawfully, safely, and effectively. So the scope of practice for health and wellness coaches in the UK and Ireland embraces working with individuals and groups in a client-centred process to facilitate and empower the client to develop and achieve self-determined goals related to their health. It also embraces supporting clients in mobilising their internal strengths and external resources, and in developing self-management strategies for making sustainable behaviour changes. What we're looking at here is an integrated wellness plan that brings the client and the wellness coach together to create a flexible working blueprint for the client's health. When working with a client on an integrated wellness plan, the coach needs to regard it as an organic and creative document where the client is at any given time and therefore is open to change. So during an integrated wellness plan pre-questionnaire, a wellness coach might want to cover some or all of these 8 areas. Number 1, physical wellness, which embraces physical fitness and medical wellness. It also involves reducing smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, and recreational drug use. 2, nutritional wellness, relating to how nourished the body and mind is. 3, relationship wellness, pertaining to the client's awareness of acceptance of themselves and those around them. Having relationship wellness increases resilience. Number 4, occupational or voluntary work wellness, which stresses the importance of having a positive attitude and a sense of fulfillment towards paid or unpaid work. Number 5, financial wellness, entailing the client's sense of financial stability and health. Number 6, environmental wellness, relating to the client's level of environmental consciousness, as our well-being is interactive, woven through with the well-being of our environment, and that includes nature. Number 7, spiritual wellness, which is about how the client perceives the meaning of life and their place in it. And lastly, number 8, mind-body wellness, embracing cognitive and emotional well-being with physical well-being. It's the end of my babble.
Wow, Laurel, it's an awful lot to think about there. It's really, really fascinating. And I mean, I'm kind of like, we need to do an inventory of all of ourselves, don't we, to see how we fare in that. I'd love to read a bit more about that. How common is it becoming that companies? I mean, you mentioned the armed forces, the police, etc. I'll come back to that. But in terms of private companies, how many people have wellness coaches as part of their offering to their staff? Is this becoming a thing?
I would say with forward-thinking companies, yes. However, in lean times, the first thing that goes is things like coaching or training. I can think of one colleague who's works for the Cabinet Office as a coach, and you know, there are environments where coaching is very much needed for supporting personnel, but it's maybe not always as integrative as it could be. So I would say that sort of the company needs to be forward thinking, and there are forward thinking companies out there, and possibly that I would say that the company maybe gets in external trainers. So with sort of employment programs, for example, maybe companies tend to mend what is broken rather than taking the preventative approach, which would be more constructive.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And when you mention the armed services and the police and, you know, personal trainers, etc., are these individuals who are coming forward to be trained by people like yourselves, or are these is it police force themselves wanting to get help and assistance? Can you just describe a bit more about that?
I would say we've had, I think there was five students came in from one police force to do a certificate in wellness coaching. I think they were already involved in frontline care. And we had a police officer in the Canadian police force who was pretty high up and sort of very much on the cutting line. Gosh, some of the tales he told, oh, make your hair curl. And he wanted to work with new officers coming in. So he was working with resilience coaching there, and who's creating magnificent programs. And then thinking of an army officer who I think she wanted to reinvent herself and sort of and have a kind of a new career outside of the army, but sort of bring it on. Well, I think she wanted to work with veterans. That was it, army veterans. Yeah. So
interesting. Yeah.
Interesting scope.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, lots of food for thought there. I'm going to open it up to our audience for questions. Who's got a question for Laurel?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in what the difference is between what you do and a life coach, because, you know, sort of a few years ago, life coaching was the thing, isn't it? Is well-being the new life coaching, or is it different? Or
good question, Jo. I tend to say, you know, a lot of people, when they sort of contact me inquiring about courses, say, what is the difference between the various courses? And this is a kind of a fairly typical question. So I tend to say that life coaching it is normally, it encompasses, it's an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term. People who train with us for life coaching normally don't know what they want to specialize in as a coach. So this is a good starting point, is it's very umbrella. Wellness coaching is much more specific. So the personnel who come on our wellness coaching diplomas need to be practicing and qualified wellness practitioners, so nurses, personal trainers, occupational therapists, or whatever they are. And then they add coaching to their repertoire and to their medical specialisms.
I see. So they're kind of like healthcare professionals that add this on to the qualifications. Because I was also going to ask, you know, when you write an article about something like this and you recommend well-being coaches, what qualifications should people look for? Because I imagine it could be a bit of a Wild West out there sometimes, you know, with, you know, all sorts of people saying they're a well-being coach. And
yeah, quite right. Unfortunately, coaching in this country, you don't need to be qualified as a coach in the UK, which is somewhat frustrating. But for best practice, for ethical practice, etc., I would. What was the question again, Jo? I don't want to ramble on in another way.
God, I can't remember now.
I
was asking, you know, what qualifications to look for.
Oh, that was it. Yeah. So ideally, a wellness coach needs to be qualified. They need to have taken an accredited qualification. Now, unfortunately, many training provider accredits their own courses. That's not an accredited course. That's an internally accredited course. They need to look for an externally accredited course. So with wellness professionals at work, our wellness coaching courses are accredited by the Association for Coaching and by the National Council of Integrative psychotherapists who have a coaching arm.
What was it called? The National
Council of Integrative Psychotherapists.
Right.
Bit of a mouthful.
Okay. So just one other question as well. You know, we read a lot about people having burnout and things like that. Is there an increasing need for this type of coaching, would you say?
Yes, I would. I sort of maybe more say a little bit more specialised, as in resilience coaching, because resilience coaching provides a variety of tools, mind, body, spirit tools, well, more psychological tools, I guess, than anything, to help improve that kind of strength of character. So a lot of people tend to think resilience is kind of stiff upper lip, and sort of if you're resilient, you can kind of like cope with anything. But resilience is about kind of being able to engage with vulnerability with confidence, and realizing when you need to ask for support. It's having the confidence to be vulnerable.
I see. Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. We've got a question from Helene. Helene, you're that's great, thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
That's
Hi,
it.
can you hear me? I'm having some tech issues, sorry. Thank you, Laura. That was really interesting. So I'd just like to ask, you talked about how you listened to your own body when you had your cancer diagnosis. And I was just wondering how you're integrating that into your practice, because that's something we've lost sight of. So my question is two parts, really. How did you, A, convince the doctors, and how do you integrate it into your practice? And also, how could we help other people to start to listen to their bodies? Because I think so many individuals have just completely lost sight because of, you know, the way they live their lives and so forth. Thank you.
Thanks, Helene. Okay, so the first part of your question, I think, was about how did I convince the doctors to listen to me? I think when I went down the Jan de Winter Clinic, which was a charity, I paid, or they wanted payment for a mammogram. So it was kind of a question of, here's my boobs and here's the 40 quid, get on with it, type of thing. So that got through that part. And then when I actually was called to the cancer clinic, the breast cancer clinic, I think it was Mr. Yelland was the consultant then, all those years ago. And he was looking at my mammogram and sort of, oh, I don't know, it's kind of all a bit whatever. How did I convince him? I don't know, staring very hard at the back of his neck. I just asked him to continue looking. And the other way, I mean, it is about being assertive with healthcare practitioners. And there was a point after the mammogram, after the mastectomy had happened, and I went back for the initial checkup, and I was on tamoxifen at that point. And the same consultant said, oh, right, well, we've done all the tissue whatevers, couldn't really find much cancer there. We're going to take you off the tamoxifen. And again, there was kind of deep and meaningful eye contact with him. And he said, I'll just check that out again. And he checked the results and he found aggressive cancer right in the core of the tissue. So back I went on to tamoxifen for the next 5 years. Thank heavens. So that's the first part of the question, I think.
Thank you.
Second part was about...
Yeah, how do you integrate listening to your body into your practice?
How to integrate listening to your... How do we integrate listening to our bodies into a healthcare practice?
Yeah, into
your
well-being, into your work, yeah.
Into, as a healthcare practitioner, do you mean? Do you mean, Helene?
Yes, I do. Yes. So, you know, you're helping other people all the time. Your own experience is very valid, and I would have thought extremely relevant. So, but I know a lot of people have lost that connection to listen to their own bodies. So they're always listening to professionals. So is it something that you integrate into your practice? And if so, how?
Right. Okay. Coaching is about empowering the client, not disempowering them. So with integrative healthcare, when I was going through my breast cancer treatment, I kind of saw myself psychologically as kind of, the MD, that was it, the MD, as it were, of my healthcare team. So there was the oncologist, there was the Macmillan nurse, there was my psychotherapist, there was a Reiki healer, blah, 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 blah. So when I work with clients, I work in that empowering way. And so when somebody comes to me, for example, a client recently came to me with IBS symptoms. So she was taking this medication and that medication. We talked about the role of stress in her life. So it's kind of, about self-inquiry, encouraging the client to consider themselves, to be mindful of their processes, to be aware of, or to develop that mind-body link, which we're not used to doing. Don't know, is that enough of an answer?
Thanks for that, Laurel. Thanks, Helene, for the question. Right, we've got time for another couple of questions. So is anybody else who hasn't asked one yet who would like to ask Laurel?
Hi, it's Jacqueline. I have a question. I'm sorry, I can't find the thing to put my hand up.
Don't worry.
Hi, Laurel. Thank you very much. You mentioned about spiritual wellness as one of your points. So I wanted to ask you two things. One, do you have a particular spiritual practice that supported you as you went through this journey? And two, how do you encourage other people's spiritual wellness?
So what did you say your name was?
I'm Jacqueline.
Oh, you're Jacqueline, right?
Hi.
Jacqueline, hi.
Thank you.
To answer the first part of the question about spiritual practices, when I was going through the breast cancer.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What sustained your spiritual wellness?
Good question. Let me just reflect on that one. I'd say that I'm born Jewish, but I'm pagan orientated. So, which is quite an eclectic mixture. My sister's a Buddhist. Hey ho, all roads lead to Rome, as they say. So I would say that I kind of drew on my essence, and my essence, again, just as kind of I saw myself as the MD of my healthcare team, that there's a number of spiritual practices that make up my eclectic approach. And by journaling, I did a lot of journaling, a lot of writing, a lot of reflecting on where I was in my life and where I wanted to be, or I thought I wanted to be. So spiritual practices, nature is it feeds me. I remember one of the visualizations I used was to sort of see myself as an olive tree, or I think it was an olive tree, it might not have been an olive tree, but with a sort of strong grey branches and a bark and dark green, shiny olive green leaves. And somehow that sustained me. So I use mind body techniques like that, as well as I remember going round, I know I stopped in the middle of my flow there. I remember as I was kind of going through the diagnosis, going around my office and around my writing area, touching everything. I don't know quite why I was doing that. I think I was trying to sort of reaffirm where I was, because it sort of felt like I'd just fallen into a black abyss. And there's nothing like falling into a black abyss to get some connections of spirituality.
Dark night of the soul.
Yeah, dark night of the soul. Yeah, nice one. So I think you then asked, the other part of the question was about spirituality with clients.
Yeah, how do you foster their spiritual wellness? It was one of your points on your list.
It's a very personal thing, isn't it? Spiritual pathways, and spiritual pathways meander and change. I kind of tend to see it like a spiral, and we're walking that spiral, and we face our lessons, and we fall into the abyss, and we clamber back onto the pathway and sort of face other lessons. So I'm client-centered. I walk with a client for a season by their side, and I am quite challenging. I wouldn't like to think I'm confrontative, it's a bit of a harsh word. I would say I'm challenging though. So asking clients what is important to them, and encouraging them to take time to reflect and connect and let go. That might sound a bit fluffy there.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline, for that question. Are there any other questions for Laurel? There are no hands up. Let me ask the final couple from me. So obviously the book's out tomorrow, but I know there've been some reviews ahead of publication. What have the reviews been like? And I don't mean just my brilliant, but you know, what's the other points that they have made, Laurel?
Right. Shall I just read out little bits?
Yeah, sure.
In front of me? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to know who they're? Well, the three key reviewers is the Association for Coaching, the National Council of Integrative Psychotherapists, and the Complementary Medical Association. So, for example, from Janie Goodard, who's the president of the CMA, she says that she would have loved to have had the book when she was starting off, and that I've done an outstanding job to bring together some of the important elements within integrative and complementary wellbeing coaching. Jeanette Marshall, who's the Director of Accreditation at the Association for Coaching, has said, I can't recommend it highly enough. Yeah. And lastly, Ray Freeman, who's the Director of Operations of the National Council of Integrative Psychotherapists. This book demonstrates a preventative approach to wellness, which can be woven into our more traditional ways.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for that. And so you've done, as you say, so many books, 36, and this one, the update, or not an update actually, but a new beast. What's next for you, Laurel?
Well, I'm continuing to work with wellness professionals. So I guess it's going to be more coaching, more creation of new innovative courses, and more writing. Can't keep a good writer down.
And you say that you do a mixture of healthcare and other topics. I mean, so the other topics are related to the other side of the training part of your work. Is that right?
Yeah, the courses that wellness professionals at work offer are diplomas and certificates in wellness coaching, resilience coaching, etc. I've got some new courses coming on board which are related to journaling. And so kind of using writing as to kind of plunge deep into one's psyche, and which is, for well-being and resilience. Yeah.
What do you say to people who say, I just haven't got time for that, I'm too busy?
I'd ask you about your self-care, I think. Are you too busy, Jacqui?
I am too busy. Yeah. I need to sort it out. Okay. Fantastic. All right. No, really, really interesting. And I think, what I would ask is, of all of those things that you've mentioned, those 8 parts that you look at in terms of the action plan, is there any one that you think people find harder to get to grips with? It's interesting that you mentioned your relationship well-being and financial wellness and environmental wellness. Which is the one that actually is hardest to get across?
Mind-body wellness. Because that is kind of about how our mind affects our body and can exacerbate or produce symptoms. I'm not saying, we're not talking psychosomatic here, we're talking very real symptoms, but also our attitude towards wellness and well-being. So I can think of one client I work with who regards it as a complete, utter sense of weakness if they're ill. They get a cold, it's weak. So it's kind of our attitude towards our health, towards illness. It's kind of our personality and mindsets that can exacerbate and produce symptoms. And then, of course, when we are unhealthy, that kind of dialoguing with the body. So, for example, maybe somebody who has a cold, often with colds, it's obviously about lowered immunity, but it can be about maybe a need to cry about something. It can also be about there's too much mental stuff going on.
Okay. All right, well, look, lots more there. And as I say, this book's published tomorrow. It's called Integrative Wellness Coaching, a handbook for therapists and counsellors, but I'm presuming it can be read by lay people too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So that's coming out tomorrow, and I think it's £26.99. So and it can be ordered online. So Laurel, thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. It's been great to hear from you. And this will be on our Guild of Health Writers website for a month. So I'm sure if we get any questions relating to that, we can pass them on to you. But thank you very much, and thank you to our audience for attending. And for the questions that you asked. So we'll be back in 3 months with our next edition. And thanks to Jatinder for organising all the admin and support. Great.